Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's Talk Consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
Well, I'm doing great today, too. Thanks for asking. And we want to thank you all for tuning in. Today in the Voice of Yoga, we will talk about the inner workings of consciousness from the spiritual standpoint of the divine creation. Listen as Swami explains how wanting originates from a false sense of separation and a belief in two powers. In this show, we will explore the modes of mortal thought as an obstruction to the perfection of being. How we think is what we become. Think with divine mind and become the image and likeness of the divine. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. Join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and be the image and likeness of the divine. So, Swami, today's title of the show is I Want Always Obscures I Am. And maybe we should start with breaking down the title of the show.
Yeah, we really want to make a clear distinction about the difference between accepting ourselves as a material mental being as opposed to a spiritual being. As we explore this, we'll look at just exactly how it appears to us from a human perspective, and then we'll discuss some of the things that are required of us in order to come out of this false sense of existence.
So we're talking also about the inner workings of consciousness from the spiritual standpoint of the divine creation. So what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, the term that we'll use here is thinking right. In order for us to really grasp an understanding of the inner workings of spirit, you must know spirit. And in order for us to really know spirit, we must know ourselves in the way that we're created, which is spiritual. A good way to start exploring this is to start reading the Bible and read Genesis 1, which is an account of the divine creation, where God makes everything and everything is very good. Then when you get into Genesis 2, there's this mist that comes over the earth, and then there's this secondary creation that is spoken of, and that's the story of Adam and Eve and the fall from Eden in the Bible. More and more we're starting to see that even though Orthodox religion really focused on that as the story of creation, it is the story of a false creation with a belief in two powers. And so it's really the story of the law of karma, which is what in Kriya Yoga we struggle to find liberation from this cycle of death and rebirth. And now what we're starting to see is the more that you can unbox that. And one of the things that I have here is a excerpt from Herb Fitch, Revelation of St. John, Class 3A, that I think would be very helpful if I read it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, he starts and he says, now just quickly review to yourself that God being all, there must be divinity standing where you are. Nobody sees that divinity, not even you. But if divinity is not where you are, then certainly God is not all. Now this is the major hypnotism that has confronted the human race. The unawareness of divinity where I stand. And from that springs a new concept of identity, which has nothing to do with the divine image and likeness of God. That new concept is a human image. It is the imitation of your divine image. And in that human image, that imitation image, you live and you die. And you have good things and you have bad things. You live in the tree of knowledge of good and evil. That's the end of the quote. But he's really laying it out here and pointing out that either God is all, or what is externalizing or appearing in our experience is not the divine creation. Because in the divine creation, God is all. And if we accept this secondary creation, we start to find that the whole thing is driven by belief, that it's not backed by divine law. And so if we can come out of this belief in two powers, the belief in the many, and accept the oneness of spiritual creation, then we can start to experience the benefits that come with that shift in awareness. And this is what we're talking about as far as the spiritual standpoint and the underworkings of the divine creation.
So in the title, when it says, I want, the I in that particular two-word phrase, that would be our personal sense of I. And then later always obscures the I am. I'm thinking that the I am, that would be the divine sense of I. Am I looking at that right?
Right. Personal sense of I is the concept of wanting, drawing what appears to be energy to a false sense of self. And that is what really creates an interference pattern which obscures us from, like what you said, the impersonal spiritual sense of this perfect divine creation, the perfection of being. And what's interesting is that this interference pattern, which can be understood as thinking with the corporeal sense mind. So the mind that we are accepting that is going to help us get through this lifetime doesn't work, because the five sense mind, the mortal mind, cannot bring forth this divine image. And that's what Paul called the glass darkly.
I was going to ask you about that because I have seen that phrase glass darkly in some of the writings of Herb Fitch, knowing that he is talking about Paul. Can we talk about that a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, that's found in 1 Corinthians 13:12. And I'll read it. For now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then shall I know even as also I am known. And that's the end of the quote. What he's really talking about is when we're living out from the belief that we are a mortal being, and we're using our ability to form thoughts and opinions based on the information that's coming through our corporeal senses, then we're in this trap. We're in the cycle of death and rebirth. And what a lot of us don't know is that is all driven by belief, that it's really not the self-existent power of the divine creation. I really like when he says, then face to face. Because when we graduate from using corporeal sense and we now live before thought and above corporeal sense, this is what in Kriya Yoga we call pratyahara, which is the 5th stage of yoga. We talk about meditation, but meditation by definition is the 7th stage of yoga. And in order for you to really meditate in the true sense of the word, you have to master the previous 6 stages. And so this 5th stage means that we live before thought and above corporeal sense. And then the thing that I like most of all is the way Mary Baker Eddy explains it in Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures. She says, and I'm paraphrasing, it's something that we must live above corporeal sense and correct it. And that's what separates the believers from those that can demonstrate this divine principle?
If I want anything from this material world that I see, hear, touch, whatever, that's always going to interfere with the I am principle, the divine knowing.
Right, because you're living out from a personal sense, which is separate from the divine creation. This is what Mary Baker Eddy calls a belief in matter. A quote here from Mary Baker Eddy, Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, page 10819. When apparently near the confines of mortal existence, standing already within the shadow of the death valley, I learned these truths in divine science, that all real being is in God, the divine mind, and that life, truth, and love are all powerful and ever present, that the opposite of truth, called error, sin, sickness, disease, death, is the false testimony of false material sense, of mind in matter, that this false sense evolves in belief, a subjective state of mortal mind, which this same so-called mind names matter, thereby shutting out the true sense of spirit. See, we can't find this divine creation with our corporeal senses. And this is what the term was called the Christ. The Christ is the saving aspect of truth. It is what makes the divine creation intelligible to the human consciousness. And without this light of spirit, we're subject to the limitation of the testimony of our five corporeal senses. And so we have to move beyond sense level of belief.
Well, I found a verse in the Bible that I thought might be interesting to talk about, and this is from Philippians 4:11, King James Version. And I'll say what it is. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. So just want to maybe get your thoughts on that.
Yeah. Now, again, the difference between I want or speak in respect of want, and then, of course, where they mention I am. And I really like the way we explain that in Kriya Yoga, because we use the term aham brahmasmi, which translates into I am the creative principle. Now, this implies the Christian concept, all that the Father has, I have. And to be wanting suggests that this isn't true for me. And the only reason why it isn't true for me is because I have a belief in something other than the allness of God. The more that you start to understand the proper use of the term I am, because if there is but one life, there is only one identity. And of course, if there's only one identity, there's only one power. And if there's only one power, there's only one activity. What is appearing on a corporeal sense level is just a thought about this divine creation. And it's driven entirely by belief. And as long as we believe that it's real, then we're in this cycle of death and rebirth. But in truth, the only thing that is real is the divine creation, which is perfect, whole, complete, fulfilled, and eternal.
Well, we're going to pause right here to hear a word from our sponsor. So listeners, we'll be back with you in just a few moments.
Snow. That's me. Or, it's like you wake up one morning, it's like, you know what? I'm tired.
Kriya Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Apotheosis is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste. Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you're listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, I just wanted to get back to that verse from Philippians 4:11. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. And after I read that, I was thinking that Paul has learned from his corporeal senses to be content with not wanting. And I just kind of wanted to get more thoughts on it, maybe go a little deeper with that.
Well, I think the key here is whatever state I am, therefore to be content. He's really not saying is we are to accept sin, sickness, suffering, death, because whatever state I am is the creative principle. I am is the divine creation, and that is perfect. And we must have fidelity to that. And whatever is reporting in our five senses, we reject. And that's very different than, and we talked a little bit about this when we talked about surrender. We're not just throwing up our hands and saying sickness is what orthodoxy might really want us to believe, is that sickness is God's way of testing us, kind of a thing. When in fact, God knows nothing about this false sense of existence that we're in. God knows God's creation. And so if we want God in our existence, we must be conscious of the divine creation. Otherwise, we're just spinning off in this cycle of death and rebirth that really starts nowhere and goes nowhere. And it's just driven by belief. But if what is reporting in our five senses has the qualities of sin, sickness, suffering, lack, limitation, that's a signal that I have a belief in something other than the divine creation.
Well, and that led me to another Bible verse. This is John 9:5, again, King James Version. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. So here we have that phrase, I am again, and hoping maybe you can shed light on that.
Yeah, again, I am in the world. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. This divine creative principle is the light of the world. Now, of course, this light of the world doesn't report in our corporeal senses. So that's why they make a distinction between this world and thy kingdom. And whatever it is that we have fidelity to, whatever it is that we have conscious awareness of, will determine our outcome.
So I've heard that phrase divine egoism. Is that the same thing as the phrase I am?
Yeah, I think so. And I really like the way Ames Knoll kind of explains that. He wrote a book called Mary Baker Eddy, Her Revelation of Divine Egoism. And on page 186, quote, strive to work from God instead of up to God. In such work, thought is as though mind were doing the knowing. The sole requisite is to accept soul as one's mind, and to know as soul, as mind. as I. Let the I go to the Father and mean the Father, not a personal sense called me. Yeah, to try and understand what he's saying here, we're accepting that there is but one life. This then becomes a subjective realization that I am the expression of this one divine life, looking at itself, as itself, of itself, to itself. This is what Paul was saying in 1 Corinthians 13:12, when he said, "Then shall I know even as also I am known." That when we're thinking with divine mind, which is very different than thinking with our 5 corporeal senses, we're thinking in terms of the absolute. There is only one. And from this perspective, from this spiritual view of creation, there are no opposites. There is no time, there's no space. These are all things that are made up in this secondary creation that originates with a belief in 2 powers, a divided consciousness. But when we're thinking with divine mind and we're seeing things in the truth of their being, whole, complete, fulfilled, perfect, that is what must start to affect what is appearing in our corporeal senses.
Swami, you had said something earlier that raised some curiosities with me, and that was that Herb Fitch quote when he talked about the hypnosis. And the first line was, "Now just quickly review to yourself that God being all, there must be divinity standing where you are." And then he says, "Nobody sees that divinity, not even you." So I want to talk more about that. So how can we go about seeing that divinity, and what do you think Herb means by that?
Well, again, it can't be seen with our corporeal senses. Spirit is whole, it's complete, and corporeal senses work on contrast. They're only picking up what has separated from this unified state of being. And so we have to cultivate spiritual sense, which originates with a belief in this one divine life. Like we're saying, I want obscures I am. Because if I'm still living in the belief that I am personal and separate from this one divine life, and I am accepting this mind that I'm calling mine is real, then again, what I'm doing is just perpetuating this regressive cycle, this cycle of death and rebirth. But once I start to know the truth, that I am the expression of this indestructible principle. I am the expression of the divine creation, which is eternal, unchanging, whole. And from that perspective, I can't want for anything because I am completely fulfilled. Even in the Bible where it says, "Ask in my name, it shall be given." What it means is, ask in my likeness. In spiritual identity, we're complete, we're whole. But from a corporeal sense level, we need to be able to perceive these divine qualities even on a corporeal sense level. Because how else would we know what we were calling truth, what we were calling this concept of God was the real God, and I was face to face with it. Because otherwise I'm working with my thought about this divine creation, which we find works on belief. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work, but it doesn't have the authority that the divine creation or the divine mind has, because the divine mind is the only real power in this universe.
And then just a little later in that quote, Herb says, "If divinity is not where you are, then certainly God is not all." And then I have a Bible verse I think that should fit that very well. This is from Isaiah 46:9. "For I am God and there is none else. I am God and there is none like me." And I think that kind of sums up what Herb Fitch said and vice versa.
Right. And then that's the I am. And then if there's an I am, which means only one God, only one life. And then if there is a me that doesn't have divine qualities, that's what we call the false sense, because it isn't backed by this divine law, but it obscures personal sense from this truth of being. For us to assume spiritual identity and accept it as who I am, it dissolves the false sense of a personal me. Just like light dispels darkness, truth dispels this error.
Well, there's a phrase that's going around in the metaphysical community. A lot of works have been written about, and it's that phrase, I am that I am. And you can actually find that in Exodus 3:14, that God says that to Moses, I am that I am. So I think now I understand what you're saying by I am, but what does it mean when it's put together in that phrase?
Yeah, it means only one. I think maybe if we came back to what Ames Knoll was saying, strive to work from God. Mary Baker Eddy would say to think with God as God. Jesus would say, I and the Father are one. That if there is but one life, there is but one mind. And for us to know that to be true, that's what we started talking about, to stop thinking and start knowing. To graduate from using our 5 corporeal senses to form opinions and judgments based on the testimony of our corporeal senses, we need to start to think with divine mind, think with the understanding that there is but one life, and it's perfect, unchanging, and whole.
So as Herb says, we are living in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and we have to change that and live from the other tree.
Yeah, we need to live from the tree of life, which is the belief in the one divine creative principle. We find that it will start to demonstrate the fruits of peace, love, happiness, joy, goodness, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, patience, temperance. These were the fruits of the Spirit. And when you're not getting these qualities in your experience, you really have to start to question, how am I thinking? And who do I think I am? And then the more that you can assimilate this idea that there is but one life, starting to unbox Scripture in the way that when you understand it, it works, rather than accepting yourself to be a mortal, finite being with a far-off God that is monitoring your behavior, rewarding or punishing you according to his laws or his rules. That's kind of an archaic approach to living, as opposed to understanding this living God right here, right now, that is reliable, dependable, accessible, and very affordable. Once you understand that it is a principle, it is a demonstrable principle that you can start to call upon, provided that you know how it's working. And the only way that it works is by knowing it to be true, to be a faithful witness.
And like you said earlier from Mary Baker Eddy's quote, that all real being is in God,
which is held, controlled, and governed by this divine law of absolute harmony, absolute love, the perfection of being.
Well, we do have to start closing down our show for today, so listeners, be sure to visit the website www.ipdtransform.com. On the homepage, when you see the fading banner, Blog Talk Radio, just click that. That directs you to the Blog Talk Radio Show catalog page. And then clicking the Products tab and Online Classes directs you to all the classes that Swami has available for you. With that, we'll end our short program. Swami, do you have any other final thoughts about today's show?
Well, I would like to encourage people to join our Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance to get the light in your soul and be the image and likeness of the divine. Namaste.
Thank you for listening to The Voice of Yoga. I am Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.